And in South America tonight, an environmental problem of a much greater magnitude.
The destruction
of the Amazon rainforest.
Once upon a time, falling through a hole in the sky, a helpless woman descended to earth. Geese, swans, beavers, and fishes of all kinds gathered to help her from drowning in the water. And this is how the story of Sky Woman began. Like any good guest, she hadn't come empty-handed, but with a bundle still well clutched in her hands. In her grasp were branches, fruits, and seeds of all kinds of plants, which she scattered onto the new land and carefully tended each one until the world turned from brown to green. Sunlight came through the hole from the skyward, and wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicines spread everywhere. Sweetgrass was the very first to grow on the earth, its fragrance a sweet memory of Sky Woman's hand. Sky Woman's story represents one of the myths of creation, mainly told by the Haudenosaunee people, a group of indigenous people from North America. Sky Woman is often recognized as the first person arriving on our planet, and therefore she is identified as the first indigenous or native person. But what does it mean to be indigenous? According to Cambridge Dictionary, the word indigenous means existing naturally or having always lived in a place, being native. However, in my opinion, it means something more, and here's why. I grew up in a really small village between the Italian mountains and countryside. I grew up running half naked, barefoot around the garden, climbing on trees and getting scars from it. I grew up looking at my mom taking care of our little piece of land and taking care of our animals. I grew up seeing her talking to plants because talking to trees heals your soul, she said. And without noticing it, she taught me what is now for me one of the most important things in my life, the connection with nature. But something changed in me last summer. A devastating storm came to my village and destroyed everything. I was here, in the Netherlands, and I started worrying about my mom. So I called her, and she was crying her eyes out. All her sacrifices and passion were immediately swiped away from one single storm, unique in its kind. And then I've realized one thing. I've always been committed to environmental issues, climate breakdown, and all those kind of topics, probably due to my mom's teachings. But that storm represented something different for me than a natural event destroying nature. I started thinking about all these people that rely on nature and depend on nature, like my mom and family. Even more, I started thinking about all those people whose home is made out of nature, out of branches and grass that we might know as indigenous people. So I started diving into this topic, and the more information I was reading, the more curious I was getting. I figured out that there are around 400 million indigenous people worldwide, still living and depending on Mother Earth, and probably even more, considering the uncontacted tribes. Unfortunately, like my mom suffered from a natural storm, most of them are victims of another storm, an economic one. Due to the increasing economy, the deforestation rates are reaching terrifying levels, which have never been seen before. From Brazil to Australia, infinite number of trees are being cut down, and with them, millions of indigenous people are losing their homes. Not only, biodiversity is suffering, the air is getting even more polluted, and ecosystems are seriously collapsing. Look at the Amazon, the world's biggest rainforest. It represents a great source of biodiversity, and it's fundamental for the climate regulation, but at the same time, it's the biggest deforestation front. All the rainforests together regulate the climate by absorbing 2/3 of the CO2 produced by human activity, and they are fundamental to harvest, breathe, and live. Imagine, only the Amazon itself creates the 20% of the oxygen that we breathe, and more than 35 million of people depend on it. then how is it possible that it represents the biggest deforestation front? Mainly due to the high demands from the Western countries, the lands inside the Amazon are being exploited, and with them, also the local communities. Large-scale agriculture, cattle, oil and gas drilling, roads and infrastructures industries are the main reasons behind deforestation. Specifically, in the Amazon, the cattle industry and the soybean production represent the main cause. But not only, illegal activities as well represent a big threat for the Amazon. Indeed, because of the resistance of indigenous people willing to protect their homes and preserve their lands, illegal activities often take place. In the best case scenario, this leads to the displacement of indigenous people. But in the worst case scenario, indigenous people are being tortured and killed. In the Amazon, like in any other part of the world, the indigenous communities are in danger. The deforestation rates are reaching levels never seen before, and they are forced to leave their homes. 60 million indigenous people are suffering, protesting, fighting for their lands, and they are fighting alone against the rich and powerful Western countries, and sadly, against their corrupted governments. They are left alone, and their basic human rights are not being considered.
Durante a campanha, a gente viu discurso ameaçador, né, contra os povos indígenas, contra a demarcação e contra a floresta. Foi impacto assim que a gente nunca pensava que poderia, né, político, né, falar dessa forma, né? Nós se sentimos ameaçados.
The 80% of the world's land, flora and fauna is in danger at the moment. 1 out of 8 million species are threatened with extinction. In 1937, the remaining wilderness on Earth was 66%, and now, in 2020, only the 35% is left. Fundamental ecosystems like the Amazon are collapsing, and we're all facing what's called the sixth mass extinction. But how can we guarantee climate justice if the people protecting the environment are being exploited and killed? Indigenous people are fundamental to preserve the environment. We must protect them and learn how to communicate with them in the most efficient way. Some of their communities are even technologically advanced, while some others don't want to have any kind of interaction or relationship with our society, with the outside world. But there is one thing they have in common, and it's their wisdom about nature. They know everything about her. They know what her strengths are, what her needs are, and also what her weaknesses are. They know how to live with her and how to communicate with her. But for them to protect their lands, there's one thing that needs to happen before. They must get their lands back. Since the beginning of history, indigenous people have been exploited and displaced from their lands, but now, in this period of time, we must learn from our mistakes and restart. Sure, new forms of legislation and an economic degrowth are possible solution to tackle this problem. But in my opinion, we need to change our perspectives on nature, and we need to reconnect with nature in order to guarantee a drastic change. We must stop for a minute and learn from the indigenous communities because they have a lot of knowledge to offer to us. But most important, I think that we really need to stop seeing nature as a resource, only offered to us to bring an economic growth, because that's not how it works. We are all facing a sixth mass extinction. And I have to say that nature will always regenerate, no matter what. But humankind won't. So even though we are not essential to nature, she is for us. For too long, I've had a hard time finding a possible solution for this climate breakdown we're all facing. As many other people interested in this field, I found myself lost in a loop of anger, sadness, disappointment. And without noticing it, I started suffering from something called climate anxiety. I couldn't find a logic into this problem, into this reality. But then I started reading all these stories about indigenous communities and how they live and even how they think about nature. And I started changing perspective. I saw a solution in them, pretty simple, easy, that has always been here in front of my eyes. I saw a solution in their way of being, in their way of living, acting, and I started analyzing my own environment because I wanted to see what I could change to feel more connected to them, to feel more connected with nature and to support them as well. I changed my diet, for example, and I started eating local and seasonal as much as I could. I'm now activating myself to change my bank account because I found out that the bank I'm currently using fully supports deforestation projects, mainly in the Amazon. I signed petitions, joined online conversation, let's say, read articles, and I just never stopped being interested in this. And the most important thing probably is that I started talking to my plants again, like my mom taught me when I was younger. And without noticing it, I was healed. Healing surely takes time and effort. A lot of effort, I would say. But for me, knowing that we can fully rely on ourselves and nature to save our precious planet, for me, that's the most powerful thing. And we need to keep in mind that we don't have to be perfect in our daily life. We don't have to feel guilty if we do something that goes against certain topics or ethics or labels. But we really need to start believing again in ourselves. We must keep in mind that our small changes, our small habits can really make the difference. And that, for me, being aware and conscious about something, it's already enough. And it's definitely a big step forward.